So as you're probably aware, there's a new Mission Impossible movie out. And yes, we're talking about Mission Impossible in a James Bond video. And it is, seemingly, the final film in the series. Like, it's called The Final Reckoning, and it goes to great lengths to tie together the 8 Mission Impossible movies that have been made over the last 30 years. Bringing back characters we haven't seen in decades, revealing that new characters are related to old characters, retconning the events of the 3rd movie so they're connected to the villain of this one. So it all feels very final, like it's all been leading to this one last mission. Like 30% of the movie is a clip show of the previous movies. But then, minor spoilers in case you still haven't seen it, despite plenty of rumors and speculation that he would, in the end, Ethan Hunt does not die. He walks off at the end of the movie to have more adventures and accept more impossible missions. This particular story is over, but his story continues. Which stands in very stark contrast to the other big spy movie franchise that ended a few years ago. Because as we all remember, and if you didn't know this, why did you click on this video? In No Time to Die, the 25th movie in the James Bond series, James Bond dies. He gets blown the hell up. It is a definitive ending for the character, or at least this version of him. The Daniel Craig era of the James Bond franchise, consisting of 5 movies across 15 years, is one of the strangest movie series of all time. With each installment, it morphs into a different kind of franchise. Halfway through, it reboots itself for a second time. And then, despite not starting that way, at the end it tries to tie itself together as one grand saga. And through all of this, it becomes the ultimate reflection of the past 20 years of franchise filmmaking. If you want to get a quick history lesson of recent Hollywood, you really only need to look at this series. Or better yet, just keep watching this video. So pour yourself a vodka martini, shake it, don't you dare stir that thing. Let's roll the title sequence. Hello, I'm Patrick Willems, and welcome back to the show. After my trip to Cannes, I am finally back in New York, the city that never sleeps and will never control its rat population. Put as many fancy new trash cans out as you want, New York rats are legion, and they will not be stopped. If you haven't heard yet, the Patrick H. Willems Spring/Summer 2025 merch collection is available now in our store, so you can show your support for the channel with a Kilms or Vibes Movies t-shirt, a Train Movies mug, or, and I'm so sorry about this, a Nobbles plush. Please buy them, I don't want them here. So the Nebula Studio, where we usually shoot this show, is booked up this week, and while a normal person might use this time to relax and take some time off after a busy trip, as regular viewers know, time off from work fills me with profound existential dread. So instead, I am shooting the video in the apartment, creating a laid-back, casual vibe that really does not fit with what I'm wearing. And if you're asking, Patrick, did you really buy a tuxedo just for this video? The answer is no. I bought it for the Cannes Film Festival video, which you clearly didn't watch. Yeah, I see the analytics. But now I am wearing it again because I really need to get my money's worth out of this thing. Anyway, the reason we're here today, the world's most famous tuxedo wearer, James Bond.
I love James Bond. Bloody Bond. I bloody love him.
James Bond is one of the longest-running, most iconic movie series of all time, spanning 6 decades, 10 presidents, and so far 8 recessions. And what's fascinating about it is that other than the very first movie, the series has never innovated. Much like your status quo-loving boomer relatives, James Bond has always been reactive. Until a few months ago, when control was wrenched away by real-life Bond villain Jeff Bezos, the Bond franchise had always been controlled by one family, the Broccolis. First there was Albert Cubby Broccoli, yes, that was his name, who then passed the reins to his daughter Barbara and her half-brother Michael Wilson. And over the decades, they've always been pretty perceptive about Bond's cultural standing. The series tends to reflect whatever is popular in Western cinema at the time. So when blaxploitation became a popular subgenre, we got Live and Let Die. When martial arts films caught on, we got The Man with the Golden Gun. A couple years after Star Wars became a phenomenon, we got Moonraker. And in the early 80s, when clowns were back in vogue, we got Octopussy. Sorry, actually, I'm seeing in my notes now that actually clown movies have never been popular, and there is still no explanation for why James Bond dresses up as a clown in the movie Octopussy. Or for that matter, why they made a movie called Octopussy. But beyond just reacting to other trends, each Bond film is almost always a reaction to the previous film. The series is constantly trying to course correct. When On Her Majesty's Secret Service initially baffled audiences with a new actor playing Bond and this weird, tragic ending, the series immediately brought original star Sean Connery back for the next film, which stuck way more rigidly to the formula. The classic New Coke strategy. When audiences complained that the outer space antics of Moonraker were too over the top, the next film, For Your Eyes Only, was way more stripped down and grounded, like Bond stayed on Earth in that one. And this tendency of the franchise has never been more true than during the Daniel Craig era. Fantastic. If you saw our video recently about the TCM Wine Club, then you know that I've been looking for a new movie-based alcohol delivery service, and luckily, I found a subscription that pairs a signature cocktail with every Bond movie, the MI6 Martini Association. Be right back. So as we discuss each film in the Daniel Craig era, we're gonna need some context, or as I'm calling it here, Bond text. These days, 2002's Die Another Day is commonly regarded as one of the worst Bond movies, with Pierce Brosnan's run ending on a low point. But most people forget that it was a big commercial success, and at the time, it was the highest grossing Bond movie ever. MGM even announced a spin-off film about Halle Berry's character Jinx that was to be directed by Stephen Frears. But thankfully, those plans were scrapped and the two of them were free to go make their passion projects, Mrs. Henderson Presents and Catwoman. Broccoli and Wilson recognized that audiences weren't crazy about Die Another Day, with a ton of criticism thrown at its fairly ridiculous set pieces filled with very bad CGI. And coming out the same year as The Bourne Identity, it looked out of touch and lame in comparison to this new kind of spy movie. Lee Tamahori, director of Die Another Day, went to see The Bourne Identity with Broccoli and Wilson and afterwards told them, quote, "Look, this game's changing fast. You're going to have to rethink this." Broccoli acknowledged they needed a change, saying, "We felt that we had gone too far in terms of fantasy with Die Another Day. We felt that we had to take a change of direction in terms of the Bond character and series. We had to go back to reality. After 9/11, frivolity didn't seem appropriate, which is terrible news for 2002's other spy movie, The Master of Disguise.
But am I not turtly enough for the Turtle Club?
And so the decision was made to not just return to the grounded feel of Ian Fleming's original novels, but to literally adapt his first James Bond novel, Casino Royale. The film was originally being developed to again star Pierce Brosnan until the team realized that this story, featuring a flashback to Bond earning his 00 status, worked better with a younger man. So they started from scratch, rebooting the entire series continuity with a new actor, who, as we all know, turned out to be Daniel Craig. In terms of influence, obviously the Bourne movies are there, but co-writer Paul Haggis pointed out the biggest one when he said, "We're trying to do for Bond what Batman Begins did for Batman." Just like Nolan did in that film, Casino Royale is taking an iconic character and telling the story of how he became like this, stripping him down to his essentials and grounding it in a very modern, tactile reality with real emotional stakes. Now, full disclosure, I think Casino Royale is by far the best James Bond movie ever made. This is #1 with a bullet for me. And it's fascinating in the ways that it adheres to the series formula while simultaneously subverting it. So as always, there is a cold open action sequence, but here it's a flashback shot in black and white. Instead of opening with the classic gun barrel motif that basically every movie has, now the gun barrel is incorporated into the narrative. Many of the regular supporting characters, like Q or Miss Moneypenny, are not there at all. And there are no gadgets and no winking quips when he kills people either. The film plays with Bond's catchphrases. When he goes to a bar and orders a martini and the bartender asks if he wants it shaken or stirred, he replies,
"Do I look like I give a damn?"
This was shaken, by the way. I mean, obviously. But the most significant change from the previous 20 movies is that for the first time ever, well, with one notable exception that we'll get to later, for the first time ever, James Bond is a complex, three-dimensional character who has a real emotional arc. In the film, like in Ian Fleming's original novel, Bond is partnered with Vesper Lynd, played here by Ava Green, and the two fall in love. And not in like a regular Bond movie way, Casino Royale actually takes the romance seriously. It is genuinely affecting, there is very real chemistry on screen, which makes it hit even harder when, at the end, after he's quit MI6 to be with Vesper, Bond learns that she is a double agent, and then the other organization she's working for kills her. And so the film ends with Bond heartbroken, but now hardened and cynical. And so, in the final scene, when he introduces himself with his iconic catchphrase, and we hear the theme song for the first time in the entire film, he is now finally the James Bond that we know. Fully formed, Bondman begins. So now, where the hell do you go from there? Okay. So, at the conclusion of Casino Royale, Daniel Craig has become the Bond James Bond that we know and love, but now with a humanity and depth that he never had before. So after that arc, what do you do with him next? Do you just go back to making regular Bond movies where he's a hardened, womanizing killing machine who never grows or changes? How do you maintain the complex characterization that had made that movie so good? Considering that Casino Royale had been a direct adaptation of the very first Bond novel, it might make sense to go back to the literary source once again. At the time, there were rumors that the following films would adapt the original novels in order: following with Live and Let Die, and then Moonraker. But producer Michael Wilson shot that down, saying, "We don't want to repeat ourselves. Those pictures were fantastic pictures. What is the point of remaking them?" And you know, fair. Throughout the first 20 movies, continuity in the Bond series was almost non-existent. The films rarely ever referenced each other, Bond's status quo never changed. The one time that it briefly did, in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the series took 12 years to acknowledge that event, and then proceeded to never mention it again. But this was a new era, and Bond always reflects the era it's in. In the early 2000s, with the massive success of the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter franchises, as well as the Star Wars prequels, audiences had become accustomed to more serialization in film series, continuing an overarching story across multiple installments. And so Bond followed suit, with the story of Quantum of Solace picking up minutes after Casino Royale, following Bond hunting down the criminal syndicate that had caused Vesper's death. It was Bond's very first direct squeakquel. Since Casino Royale had been such a major critical and commercial success, Quantum of Solace doubled down on everything from it. It was even grittier and even more violent. There's even less humor and less of the classic James Bond glamour. So this time, the Bourne movies were an even more overt influence. Bond is so angry the whole time in this movie, still really upset over Vesper, that he talks less than ever, and thus ends up feeling more like Jason Bourne. The film ditches Martin Campbell's beautiful, legible action filmmaking for a super quick cut, super shaky, and generally extremely poor imitation of Paul Greengrass's visual language. They even brought on Dan Bradley, the stunt coordinator and second unit director from the Bourne movies, but unfortunately, you can barely see any of his work in those action scenes. On top of this, despite there being a criminal syndicate resembling Spectre from the classic movies, the main plot is so grounded as to be extremely dull. Instead of Mads Mikkelsen weeping blood, the villain is a little Frenchman who's stealing Bolivia's water so that he can sell it for higher rates. Thrilling stuff. Like, if that's your plot, at least make it vitamin water that he's stealing. Remember, this was the 2000s, and vitamin water was really having a moment. And you know Bond loves product placement.
Rolex?
Amiga.
The film ends with Bond finding Vesper's former boyfriend, a quantum agent, and arresting him. He drops her necklace in the snow and returns to work, seemingly now having closure. But of course, Quantum is still out there. He only took down one of their guys. The film was a hit, but audiences and critics widely viewed it as a disappointment, especially coming after Casino Royale. Craig and the producers largely blamed its problems on the 2007 writer's strike, which forced the film to start production before the script was totally ready. But while that may have played a role, I think the larger creative decisions had already been made, and the problems were already there. And so, despite the film leaving several dangling story threads, with Mr. White and Quantum still at large, the creative team decided to shift in a different direction. Ah, yeah, that's the good stuff. So, Skyfall.
Skyfall.
What's weird about Skyfall is that it is the third installment in the rebooted Bond series, and it's basically another reboot. Casino Royale took the classic Bond formula and said, what if we stripped this down to a more grounded story about a 00 agent early in his career with a real emotional core and a genuine character arc? Quantum of Solace, I think largely fails, but it tries to continue that story with various plot threads and Bond's emotional journey directly coming out of the events of Casino Royale. And then Skyfall discards all of this, presenting a Bond who seems to have aged like 15 years since Quantum. In one movie, Bond jumps from early in his career to an aging veteran agent. Right in the opening scene, we see him partnered with a younger partner to highlight Bond's experience. He has gray hairs in his beard, and for the whole movie, all the other characters keep talking about how he's lost a step and how it's a young man's game, and comparing him to an old warship being hauled away for scrap. It's like, damn, what the hell happened in the past 4 years? Well, the podcast James Bonding, hosted by Matt Gorley and Matt Myra, has this crazy theory that the entirety of the original series, from Connery through Brosnan, takes place between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. Now, obviously, this doesn't really stand up to any scrutiny, especially once you get to Spectre, but it kind of makes emotional sense. I mean, wouldn't you feel worn down after fighting Jaws twice, blowing up Kananga like a helium balloon, going into space, hanging out with Sergeant J.W. Pepper on 2 separate occasions, and constantly having sex every few minutes? I think that would make anyone go prematurely gray. Skyfall pivoted away from the Bourne movies and instead had one major, very obvious influence. I'm talking about Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Director Sam Mendes acknowledged as much in interviews, saying he was, quote, directly inspired by it. And it's easy to see in the film itself, the way it takes heightened elements from the past and reconfigures them to be grounded in the very self-serious reality of the film. Like, Bond's big gadget here is a pistol with a palm print reader. And of course, there is the villain, Raul Silva, who, much like the Joker, is a flamboyant terrorist mastermind with a sense of humor. And in a major structural similarity, the villain lets himself get captured in the second act. With Skyfall, the series makes another major pivot. After discarding many of the well-known Bond elements and tropes with Casino Royale in favor of a fresh start, Skyfall is obsessed with the franchise's past. It rebuilds the supporting cast, introducing a new Q and a new Miss Moneypenny. It brings back the colorful villains with secret island lairs. Even the theme song, after 2 movies with modern rock songs, brought in Adele to harken back to the classic Shirley Bassey sound of the 60s. It even brings back the classic 1960s Aston Martin, complete with miniguns in the headlights, which Bond keeps in storage as if he's had it for years, giving further fuel to the theory that all the other movies are canon. Maybe even Never Say Never Again and the insane 60s version of Casino Royale, where James Bond sends Woody Allen to hell. That might sound like a joke, but it's not. That movie is weird. But the return to the past isn't just subtext. In the third act, Bond takes M to his childhood home, which totally contradicts Vesper's read on him from Casino Royale that he doesn't come from money. No, based on the size of this estate, he very clearly does. The film returns to James Bond's literal past and then burns it to the ground, sending this subtextual message that the only way to move forward is to burn the past and start from scratch. Something I feel like some guy in some movie said a few years later.
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to.
But, as we were about to learn, the series had absolutely no intention of letting the past die. Because Skyfall became, and still is, the most successful James Bond movie ever made. It's the only one to gross $1 billion, it won Oscars, and let's be real, the movie rocks. It's really good. But, as we've learned, a good Bond movie usually means the next one will double down on all the wrong things. Okay, I'm gonna need another martini for this next part. So, remember all that stuff about how Bond constantly reacts to whatever the audience thought about the previous movie? Well, in Skyfall, they brought back a lot of classic Bond elements. They did more homages to the original movies. And it ended up being the biggest success the franchise had ever had. So next time, they went even harder with the throwback nostalgia stuff, and we got Spectre. Sam Mendes returned to direct, the first time a director had made successive Bond films since the 80s. And this time, and I think this is really notable, Daniel Craig became a co-producer. He was now the most creatively involved Bond actor the series had ever had, and had a big hand in the story decisions. Since Skyfall's return to classic Bond elements was so successful, Spectre included way more of them. Most obviously, there was the return of the crime syndicate Spectre, led by Ernst Stavro Blofeld, famously James Bond's arch-nemesis. And just like in the old movies, he wears a Nehru jacket and has a white cat. But the entire film is filled with homages to Bond's past. There's a romantic train journey that's interrupted by a fight, like in From Russia with Love. Bond wears a white tuxedo, like in Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, and The Man with the Golden Gun. There's a silent henchman resembling Oddjob or Jaws. There's an ejector seat in the Aston Martin, like in Thunderball. Blofeld gets a scar on his right eye, like in You Only Live Twice. Now, okay, I'm gonna stop here, but trust me, there are a lot more of these. After Casino Royale had deliberately stripped away most of the Bond lore and iconography, Spectre and Skyfall had brought almost all of it back in. Spectre was even the first of the Craig movies to begin with the gun barrel motif, just like all of the classic movies. But beyond the decision to lean harder into nostalgia and fan service, the film, as always, attempts to reflect the cinema of the moment. And the biggest thing happening in 2015, of course, was the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with its interconnected multi-film arcs. Skyfall had ditched all of the plot threads from the first two movies, ignoring everything with Mr. White and Quantum. The stories of the last two movies basically had nothing to do with each other. But what Spectre presupposes is, maybe they did? Spectre retcons connections between the previous three films, making it a culmination of a 4-film arc that it had never actually been building to. And they do this by having Blofeld, who is played here by Christoph Waltz, simply list things that happened in the previous movies and take credit for them. Spectre really wants Blofeld to be the Thanos of this series, even though none of the previous three films had him in mind at all when they were being made. So Quantum is now a sub-organization within Spectre, and apparently all of the previous villains had been following the directives of Blofeld, a premise that falls apart immediately if you think about it for even a minute, since Raul Silva in Skyfall was clearly motivated by his own personal vendetta against M. Blofeld claims to have been responsible for Vesper's death, and how? Like, seriously, please go back to that scene and explain to me how he fits into that at all. Because it doesn't make sense. And because the series had committed to giving James Bond a greater emotional connection to the story of each film, the decision was made to revamp Blofeld, but now to give him a direct link to James Bond. So now it's revealed that Blofeld's real name is Franz Oberhauser, and he and James Bond became foster brothers after Franz's father took in James following the deaths of his parents. So Blofeld's whole plan is motivated by jealousy because he claims that when they were kids, his father gave James more attention. This is, I think, an incredible example of a problem that has plagued modern franchise filmmaking. This idea that everything in a story needs to be linked to the protagonist's backstory. Like when the Amazing Spider-Man movies revealed that Peter Parker's father created the spider that gave him his powers, and he programmed it with his own DNA, so Peter was basically destined to become Spider-Man. And then there is, of course, and you knew this was coming, Rey Palpatine. This attempt to create deeper personal stakes instead ends up shrinking what once felt like a vast, exciting world. It makes the protagonist less interesting and takes away their agency because all of this was just destined to happen to them regardless of what they did. And in this instance, it makes Blofeld a pretty pathetic antagonist. Like, we're expected to believe that he dedicated his life to building this massive crime syndicate just because he was jealous of some other kid? What a loser. No Time to Die. Daniel Craig's final film as James Bond, and to date, the last film in the series. A film that, in classic Bond fashion, seems to be fully aware of everything that people didn't like about the previous installment. And so, despite Spectre declaring that Blofeld is the grand nemesis of the whole series, in his words, the architect of all Bond's pain, he only appears in a single scene in this movie, in which he is abruptly killed off. And a few minutes earlier, the entire Spectre organization is also wiped out in a single scene. The movie is telling us that in the grand scheme of this story, they don't really matter. Because this time, Bond is less a reflection of a specific popular film or franchise, and instead it is a reflection of a cultural trend. No Time to Die was made during 2018 and 2019 and was intended to be released in 2020 before the pandemic delayed it to late 2021. And this was a time when Hollywood was obsessed with endings and legacy. In 2019, long-running series like Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe reached their long-awaited conclusions. Within a month of No Time to Die, Spider-Man No Way Home was released, which tied together the entire history of the Spider-Man franchise through all of its different eras. In the span of a handful of years, we got legacy sequels to Star Wars, The Matrix, Ghostbusters, The Karate Kid, Bad Boys, Rocky, The Terminator, Jurassic Park, Halloween, Blade Runner, The Shining, Mary Poppins, Scream, and of course, Coming to America. And so No Time to Die became not just another James Bond movie, it became the James Bond legacy sequel. The movie that reckons with the entire history of the franchise and character, and then is determined to bring it all to an end. After the cold open, in which James Bond visits Vesper Lynd's grave, tying it back to Casino Royale, the film jumps ahead 5 years. Now, Bond is retired and has been replaced as 007. But of course, that retirement cannot last. The aging secret agent has to put on the tuxedo for one last mission that is tied to his past. And on that final mission, James Bond dies. Like, for real, he gets his shit rocked so hard. Like, 50 missiles slam into this guy and totally eviscerate him. And then, at the end of the credits, in a moment of unintentional comedy, it still tells us that James Bond will return. And yes, I know that's referring to the inevitable reboot with a new actor in a new continuity, but it still seems weird when this guy very definitively died just a few minutes earlier. I've had a lot of martinis. Now, if you'll excuse this brief tangent, I want to talk about comic books for a minute. In the early 2000s, in an effort to attract new, younger readers who were turned off by decades of dense continuity, Marvel Comics started a new line of titles existing in their own universe, which they called Ultimate Marvel. The Ultimate Comics took iconic characters and modernized them. Most core aspects still stayed the same, like Peter Parker is still Spider-Man with the same costume and the same powers. But other elements changed. Instead of being an alien, the Venom symbiote was a thing created in a lab by Peter Parker's parents. Instead of putting on a goblin costume, Green Goblin here transforms into a Hulk-like monster. And Kraven the Hunter is now an Australian reality TV star. And the comics would use elements and iconography of classic stories, but twist them, deliberately playing on our expectations and knowledge of the original comics. So instead of Gwen Stacy, here Green Goblin throws Mary Jane off of a bridge, but she survives. They're largely new stories, but like any adaptation, they're in conversation with the original material. And rewatching the Daniel Craig Bond movies, I realized that they're doing the exact same thing. Like, this is essentially Ultimate James Bond. It brought back classic characters, but with a modern spin. So Moneypenny is now a black woman and a former field agent. Q is young and gay. M is Ralph Fiennes now. Blofeld is now Bond's foster brother. Look, some of these changes are better than others.
All this Bond stuff sounds pretty similar to the reboot of Star Trek.
Nobbles, what the hell? How'd you get in here?
As you know, your contract says you have to have a producer present during every episode. Also, the door was propped open by a bunch of empty boxes with MI6 written on them. So I let myself in.
You made me spill my martini on myself.
Anyway, what you were saying reminded me of the 2009 Star Trek reboot.
Wait, Nobbles, you're a Trekkie?
Do Klingons love blood wine?
I don't know, do they?
They do. The point is, the J.J. Abrams Trek movies are essentially doing the exact same thing as James Bond.
Okay, because it takes a series from the 1960s and reboots it with an origin story? I mean, it's a little thin.
Yeah, but think about it. The first movie totally nails the concept, but then the sequel messes it up. Into Darkness does the exact same thing as Spectre.
Right, like reintroducing the most famous villain from the original series, but then weirdly trying to mislead the audience into thinking he's someone else.
Exactly. Benedict Cumberbatch is John Harrison? Give me a break. We all knew he was Khan.
Yeah, the reveal falls totally flat. Same exact thing in Spectre with Christoph Waltz as Franz Oberhauser when we all knew he was gonna be Blofeld.
And then Into Darkness turns into a remake of Wrath of Khan, recreating specific shots and quoting lines just to keep pressing the nostalgia button in the hope that it will satisfy the audience.
So wait, Nobbles, you're always Mr. Keep It Posy. Are you saying you don't like Star Trek Into Darkness?
It's true. That movie stinks.
Wow.
Hey, do you think this might be the beginning of a Kirk and Spock level friendship?
No, I don't. And now I need to go change because you made me spill my drink all over myself. So go make yourself useful and make me another martini.
You got it, buddy.
The number one question that I kept coming back to rewatching these 5 movies was, how the hell did they choose that shitty Sam Smith song for Spectre over the one Radiohead made? But the number 2 question was, once you finish the character arc in Casino Royale, where else is there to go? Part of the design of James Bond has always been the lack of change. He is a charismatic vehicle for action and exotic adventures. He does his job, and along the way, he has some casual flings, but never serious relationships. The guy has no personal life outside of his work. He honestly is not that interesting. When you go back to the original Ian Fleming novels, they were spy novels very much in the vein of detective fiction of the time, with characters like Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, or Lou Archer. In those books, yes, the characters all have emotional backstories, but in the stories themselves, they largely remain static. These are procedurals. The status quo almost never changes. Each installment is just another case. Other characters in the stories might have emotional journeys, but the protagonists stay in their place. They are the sturdy cement foundation that it's all built on. If they were to change or grow too much, they might leave their jobs or disrupt the formula of these stories. To do more with these characters, you need something like the recent TV miniseries Monsieur Spade, a legacy sequel following Dashiell Hammett's character Sam Spade retiring and moving to France. Now that he's no longer boxed in by the formula of the regular stories, there's actually room to delve deeper into the character and push him into new territory. Casino Royale establishes that the relationship with Vesper Lynd is one of the defining events of James Bond's life. It helps make him who he is. So anything in the subsequent films has to live up to that. And so, the series keeps trying to find ways to make the stories personal. In Skyfall, they lean into the relationship with M as a sort of mother figure. In Spectre, they make Blofeld his foster brother in an attempt to create emotional stakes. As I mentioned earlier, starting with Skyfall, the franchise became really enamored with nostalgia, revisiting classic tropes and paying homage to the original films. And so, the answer they found to this problem, the one way they saw to both continue Bond's character growth while also keeping up the nostalgic throwback vibe, was to return to the only classic Bond movie with an emotional core. On Her Majesty's Secret Service has always been the weird outlier of the James Bond franchise, the Tokyo Drift of the 1960s. It's the only film starring George Lazenby as Bond, and the only one to deviate from the regular formula and give its main character a real emotional story. Instead of another casual fling with a ridiculously named Bond girl, here he falls in love with Countess Teresa Di Vincenzo, a normal name, played by the great Diana Rigg. And at the end of the film, James Bond quits MI6 and they get married. But sadly, minutes later, Blofeld murders her and she dies in James Bond's arms. And it is, for real, actually very sad. Until Casino Royale, this was the only film that dared to probe Bond as a character and push him into genuine emotional territory. It was the only serious romance the character had ever had on screen. And so, in the Craig era, as they've looked more and more into the past, pulling story elements and iconography and characters from the original 20 movies, they also have a series now where James Bond needs to be a three-dimensional character with an emotional journey. And so you end up with this bizarre situation in which Spectre and No Time to Die together form this loose 5-hour-long remake of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Okay, so let me break this down for you. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, James Bond is pursuing his arch-nemesis, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, the head of Spectre, the biggest crime syndicate in the world. He encounters Teresa Di Vincenzo, who's the daughter of the head of a rival crime syndicate. James and Teresa fall in love. James visits a clinic in the Alps. Blofeld is working on a plan involving weaponized viruses. In the end, Bond quits MI6, marries Teresa, and right after the wedding, she is murdered by Blofeld. Also, this part is not in the movie, but at the beginning of the original Ian Fleming novel, James visits the grave of Vesper Lynd, who of course was the first love of his life and died in Casino Royale. So now let's look at Spectre and No Time to Die. Here, Bond learns that Quantum, the crime syndicate he had dealt with before, is a division of the larger syndicate, Spectre, which is run by Blofeld. He learns that Mr. White, the leader of Quantum, has a daughter named Madeline Swan, whom he meets in a clinic in the Alps. Bond falls in love with her and quits MI6 to spend his life with her. While traveling together, James visits Vesper Lynd's grave. The villain has a plan involving weaponized viruses. They quote the final line of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, "We have all the time in the world," multiple times.
We have all the time in the world. You have all the time in the world.
The score by Hans Zimmer features the musical theme from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and the film ends with the Louis Armstrong song from that movie. And in the end, Madeline Swan survives, but James Bond sacrifices himself to save her and the daughter they have together. Look, as far as remakes go, this is not the Gus Van Sant Psycho. It's not a direct one-to-one, shot-for-shot kind of thing. But it does contain many of the core story elements, as well as recurring visuals, like Bond and his lover driving along the side of a cliff, or chase scenes down a snow-covered alpine mountain. And at their core, these are both telling the story of how James Bond, the cold-hardened, womanizing killer, let his guard down and found love in a hopeless place, trying to live a normal life which eventually ends tragically. With such a definitive ending, and the final two films going to such great lengths to tie the whole series together, we are now meant to look at these 5 movies as one grand saga. So, what story is it actually telling? The series begins and ends with tragedy. This guy has found love twice in his life, and each time it ends with someone dying. And along the way, almost everyone close to Bond ends up dead. M, who became like a mother figure to him, Felix Leiter, the closest thing he has to a friend, even his foster brother. Now, a big problem here is just the character of Madeline Swan. As the one other woman that James Bond falls in love with, we can't help but compare her to Vesper Lynd. And I'm sorry, but she just doesn't measure up. Vesper felt so alive and so exciting. In that initial meeting on the train, the chemistry between the two of them is electric. I believe these characters are falling in love. And look, Léa Seydoux is a terrific actor. I have liked her in so many movies, and obviously she is one of the most attractive women alive. But at no point do I believe that this relationship is the one that Bond is going to walk away from MI6 for. There is, no chemistry here. And because the movie itself is drawing the comparison, she is also a poor substitute for Teresa in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I just don't believe that this is the love of James's life. While the original Bond films almost always end with James victorious, usually saving the world, his wins in the Craig era are relatively minor. In Casino Royale, he loses. He's not the one who kills Le Chiffre. Vesper dies in the end. In Skyfall, he ultimately fails to save M. And so his ultimate sacrifice in No Time to Die feels like a redemption. This guy who has been a magnet for pain and death and heartbreak. Blofeld founded Spectre, this huge crime syndicate, with the express purpose of just tormenting James Bond.
It was all me, James. It's always been me, the author of all your pain.
But now, he has a child, and so he lets himself die in the hope that this new generation can do better. Oh, but we can't forget that he did save Bolivia's water supply that one time. So that's good. The films seem conflicted about whether Bond is good or bad. They think he's cool, and they love the iconography, but also they think that he's this out-of-touch relic of the past. No Time to Die surrounds him with younger women who are just as capable as he is, if not more. But then, near the end, they all step aside and agree that actually, Bond is the only one who can do this. And at the end of the movie, he is infected with this virus that specifically targets the DNA of Madeleine Swann and their daughter. So he is literally made so toxic that he can't touch his family. This is a series fighting with itself about whether or not James Bond should still exist in the 21st century. But really, the bigger story it's telling is about modern cinema. How gritty reboots in the 2000s gave way to serialized franchises and interconnected cinematic universes and a hunger for nostalgia, which finally led us to a collection of legacy sequels obsessed with the past. It feels like the last 6 years of cinema have been this reflection point, with long-running stories concluding as filmmakers and audiences look back on decades of film history. And hopefully, going forward, they'll build something new. Or in the case of that Harry Potter show they're making, pointlessly spend the next decade rehashing something. As the credits promised, James Bond will inevitably return, once again rebooting continuity and starting from scratch. We've had a few years now of feverish speculation about what the series will be next. Will it be a period piece? Or will it maybe swing back to the lighter, sillier vibe of the Roger Moore era? Look, I don't know what it will be next, but I think the Craig era revealed the limits of what you can actually do with James Bond as a character. This will probably be best remembered as the era where they gave Bond depth, where they injected some real emotion into it. And it's kind of ironic that, in a bid to push the character forward into emotionally uncharted territory, they ended up largely rehashing old existent material. But the bottom line for this humble video essayist is that they never topped what they did in Casino Royale, and I'm not sure they ever will. It's hard to imagine that they're just going to return to the classic, emotionless, never-changing episodic Bond. Hey, maybe since Jeff Bezos now owns all of this, they'll do a remake of Moonraker, but with tasteless Blue Origin product placement. But look, we'll find out eventually. I personally am in no rush, because, as James Bond famously said, wait for it, wait for it.
Patrick! I'm ordering food if you want some.
God damn it, Nobbles, you stepped on my bit! I was gonna do the line at the end. I mean, yes, I do want food.
I have the menu pulled up on my phone. Should we get some apps to share?
Yeah, whatever. The moment's passed. Okay, I'm starving. One sec. Let me just figure out what I want to get.
No rush, Patrick. We've got all the time in the world.
So one of the things that's so unique about the Bond franchise is that recasting the main role has always been a key part of the series. But in this modern era, that is something that many other franchises are refusing to do. And that is what our next episode is about. Digital de-aging and digital actors. Once interesting technology that now signals a terrifying potential future for cinema. And actually, you can watch that episode right now because it's already finished. You don't need to wait a month because it is streaming this very moment on Nebula, the streaming service that I helped build, where all of our regular episodes premiere weeks early. And after you watch that, what I really recommend you check out on Nebula is Amy's Dead End Dreamhouse, the new comedy show from the great Maggie Mae Fish that just premiered a couple weeks ago. It's a comedy about millennial angst in the form of a surreal kids show with puppets and talking appliances and a pet cinder block, plus musical guests. There's a fake commercial in the first episode for drinkable lava lamps that I think is just exquisite. It's really great. The show is streaming exclusively on Nebula, the creator-built streaming platform that is home to shows like Jetlag and Abolish Everything, and also my upcoming short film, The Dinner Plan, and also I just directed an episode of our upcoming anthology series, Subliminal, that I'm really excited about, and so I personally have a lot of cool stuff coming out soon exclusively on Nebula. So if you want to watch these big, ambitious new projects from people like me and your other favorite creators, Nebula is the only place to do that. And if you use my link to sign up, you can get a full year of Nebula for 40% off, which comes out to only $3 per month. Plus, a cut of that goes directly to me, so it's supporting this channel, and it helps us fund the really exciting new projects that we're developing right now. Oh yeah, and again, you also get all of my videos early. It just makes sense. So you can click the link in the description or scan this QR code and start watching right now. Oh, okay, I think the food is here already. That was really fast. So I'm gonna go have a very late dinner and then go watch the new episode of Amy's Dead End Dreamhouse. Bye.